All right, we are back with another episode of Summer Showcase Northern Lights. It's been a couple weeks since we have been here, but we are back finally uh, to talk some great CFL action. We got a couple weeks worth of games to kind of rehash. We're going to focus more on last week than the week before, but we will kind of discuss and give you an update on the current standings as well. So before we get into that, Michael, how you doing tonight, man?
Good man, good. And, just been excited that we've had football year round, and uh, CFL leading into NFL with the ELF winding up and the IFL soon ending. I mean, it's been crazy, but I'm doing well, man, and love talking about the north of the border.
No doubt, no doubt. I mean, you always are kind of our, for lack of a better term, non-American leagues, um, expert. You're constantly covering the ELF, the LFA, and now the CFL. So definitely appreciate being able to do this show with you in particular. I know how much you follow football, and you're honestly probably more in tune than most of us with all these different leagues that are outside the U.S. So really appreciate you coming on every week and doing this show with us for sure.
Yeah. No, I mean,
Yeah.
I plan on trying to hopefully maybe eventually get to the GFL and the X League too, at some point in time here in the near future too. So I don't know if I'll be bringing shows per se to that, but I definitely will be probably more in touch with those leagues hopefully here sooner rather than later. So
Completely understand. I mean, there's a lot to cover, and we're trying to cover it all, but we're only so many people, that's for sure. And Michael definitely has a lot on his plate already, so we definitely don't need to overload him and make him reconsider this whole thing. That's for sure.
well,
Um,
I mean once summer showcase OT with the ELF, I don't know if that one will end up coming back next year or not. I'm hoping it will, but if it doesn't, then that will open up another slot for me to probably put a new show in. So we'll see what happens.
there you go. There you go. Definitely been an interesting to kind of watch that show unfold. I mean, obviously with quarterback Zach Bronkhorst, who was with the Seaman Milano earlier on in the season, and obviously had been since released. Interesting episode if you want to go back and see his reaction to it. Consummate professional, that man. Got a lot of respect for how he handled that situation on camera, literally like the day he was released. So
Yep.
pretty interesting how he was still on with us, still dedicated to the show, and just generally have a lot of respect for him and how he handled that situation. So if you haven't
And
checked
I can attest that on camera was how he handled it off camera too.
I believe it.
So
I believe it. That's just kind of the guy he is since I've met him and had conversations with him. And, look forward to getting to know him more because obviously a great dude. And he's got a lot more football left in front of him, I have a feeling.
yeah, I think so too.
But hopefully, maybe even in the CFL. We'll see.
Hey, never know, right?
Exactly. Speaking of the CFL, we'll go ahead and get through the updated standings real quick. So obviously, as I mentioned a moment ago, we have not been here for 2 weeks. So we've had a couple changes. As you can see, Montreal is kind of the class of the league currently, despite the fact that they've had to start literally every quarterback that was on their active roster to begin the season, with Davis Alexander, the most recent one. And man, we'll get to him in a second here. BC still looking like a talented team, even though this past week they had a little bit of a hiccup. Saskatchewan, same thing, a little bit of a hiccup, still solid team. And then this team right down here, Ottawa, just blown away that they're 5-2 right now. Literally have watched multiple seasons of them not being able to win more than 4 games. So we could like pack it in right now. I'd be a happy camper this season, but lot of football left to go here, and we've got a lot left to figure out. I mean, obviously the playoff race is going to be very interesting with the crossover. You got Calgary, Winnipeg, Toronto, even technically Hamilton and Edmonton are still sort of in it. It would take a lot for them to get there, but Edmonton's looking like a completely different team with Tre Ford in there now. So um, well, I take it you're not jumping on the Edmonton hype train quite yet.
It's not that. It's just this is a move that should have happened earlier. I mean, look, I love that Tre Ford is getting a chance. I love that Tre Ford is out there now showcasing what his ability is. But we saw this last year. He did the same thing. And once the league caught up to him, it was like 500, I think, for the rest of the year. So eventually the same thing is going to happen unless the head coach can find a way to keep this offense fresh and unique. And I'll be honest with you, in this game against Saskatchewan this past weekend, it felt more like a Saskatchewan miss than it did an Edmonton hit. And I don't know if that's just because Saskatchewan expected this to be the same team that they played in week one or what, but it felt like Saskatchewan was off in this one. Part of this is also with Saskatchewan is this particular game was they're missing Trevor Harris. Like Shea Patterson has played well. Don't get me wrong. It's just Harris brings such a unique edge to this league because of his experience in veteran status, and he was playing lights out before the injury, right? So you bring in Shea Patterson, who has all the ability in the world, but Patterson hasn't been a full-time starter since what, college, high school? I mean, no, college, right? When he was with Michigan.
Yep.
So he's split time everywhere he's gone. He's been a backup in other cases. So even though he's played well over the course of the last few weeks, he's still a guy who is going to make those mistakes, especially in the league that's brand new and fresh to him, like the CFL is. So I feel like the Saskatchewan team is definitely a better team with Trevor Harris, and they're a whole different team with Trevor Harris. And I don't think that this game goes this way if Harris is under center in comparison to Patterson. So I feel like it's just more of a Saskatchewan letdown than it is necessarily an Edmonton hit. That's all.
That's fair. That's fair for sure. I mean, Saskatchewan obviously has been a really talented team all season long, but they've kind of won in spite of their quarterback play instead of it. So,
Yeah.
or I mean, because of it. Sorry about that. So, I mean, Trevor Harris was playing great before the injury, and it's kind of unfortunate to see him go down like he does, but he is in his, his above 35 age at that point. I think he's 37 now. So, I mean, definitely one of those things that you got to watch for going forward, because obviously it's only going to get worse before it gets better. I mean, as you near 40 years old playing professional football, these injuries are going to crop up more and more often.
Yeah. I will say for Shea, his audition for the future for Saskatchewan, I think, has been solid enough to earn him a chance to succeed Harris if Harris does choose to retire. I do think he's played well enough to at least garner that conversation, right? I don't think it's a pressing need for Saskatchewan to go out and do that. Calgary took a very similar stance with Jake Mayer a few years ago, right? With Bo Levi Mitchell, and basically was like, here's your audition, it's yours. If you fail at it, then guess what? And there were some growing pains last year, but even though this team's 4-4 right now, I feel like that he is playing much better than what the record necessarily shows. So he still has his mistakes. He's still young as a starter, and I think that Shea is going to do the same thing. But I feel like he deserves an opportunity to be in that conversation at the very least.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, his athletic ability is such that he brings a different dynamic to that offense, and he was the short yardage quarterback for a reason before taking over as the starter. I mean, just to throw some stats out there real quick, they're not amazing. They're not going to blow your mind, but 96 of 154, 1,300 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 8.4 yards per attempt. But he's also added 4 rushing touchdowns and another 103 yards rushing. So, I mean, definitely a little bit more dangerous on the ground than Trevor Harris at this point in his career. And he is quite a bit younger. My big question for him is, how long can he keep this going? Is this truly who Shea Patterson is? Can he improve upon this? Or is this the ceiling? Is this the ceiling for him? And if that's the case, then I don't necessarily know that he should be the future for Saskatchewan.
And he may not be 100%. Like, to be completely honest with you, he may not be. It's just I think that he's played, in a sense, to be able to at least garner enough of the conversation to be in it. Whether or not that ends up being the case is a different story. I'm not on the coaching staff, so they may see things differently in practice. But I feel like with Saskatchewan, the way that this team is are well ahead of where we expected them to be, right? Like, let's be honest, we did not expect them to be here. I don't think Saskatchewan expected them to be here, at least not early in the season. They probably started believing once they were 4-0, and they probably started believing a little bit more, or 3-0, or whatever it was. But they've kind of come back down to earth a little bit, and a lot of that does stem from the Trevor Harris injury. But Patterson has still kept them in games, and I think that that's all that you can ask for from a backup quarterback during this stretch. So losing to Edmonton obviously is a big hit because the team is 1-7, and it would have put Saskatchewan, kept them in the lead in that conference. But I think he's doing enough, at least, to not completely fall irrelevant, personally.
That's fair. That's definitely fair. I mean, obviously, like we spoke about just a moment ago, he is the short yardage option when Harris is healthy. So that's definitely something to consider as far as his long-term stability on the roster. But let's go ahead and get into last week's games. As you can see, I pulled up the stats for the BC Lions and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, which ended up to being one of the most surprising games of the weekend, in my personal opinion. What are your thoughts on this game overall? And I mean, as you can tell right there at the top, Vernon Adams Jr. only 74 passing yards on 17 attempts. I mean, talk about the defensive performance by Winnipeg, considering the fact that Adams was nearly on pace to set a league record for passing yards.
Yeah, I mean, there's really not much you can talk about in this one, right? Like, their plays were limited. They had 20 pass attempts and they had 11 carries. Like that I mean, what else was in there in between? You know what I mean? Like, so it's not pretty. Winnipeg's defense was absolutely stifling in this game. I will tell you that this is a huge concern, in my opinion, for BC. If I'm a BC fan and if I'm the BC coaching staff, I'm looking at this going, okay, we need to fix this fast, because I feel like Vernon Adams was running around back there trying to make plays. The lack of a run game is still mind-boggling. They're very one-dimensional. It was almost like Winnipeg was getting the play call at the exact same time. It was not pretty. It was not a good offensive performance in the least bit. And it literally boiled down to Vernon Adams just basically running around for his life. Winnipeg just put the pressure on him, and they had something to prove, and they just went out there and bullied that BC offensive line and said, guess what? We don't care who you are.
Absolutely. I mean, to your credit, you're talking about Vernon Adams running around for lack of a better term, for his life. And, at the end of the day, he ended up injured because of it. So, I mean, that's a long-term concern for this team, or at least a short-term concern, depending on how quickly he can return to 100% from that knee injury. But, I mean, if he's hobbling around and he's not necessarily himself, that's a huge blow to the way that BC wants to run their offense. I mean, Vernon Adams is almost as dangerous running as he is throwing the ball. And that's part of what makes BC's offense so efficient, is they can kind of keep you on your toes with that run threat from Adams. So, I mean, that's a definite huge concern, especially on top of the way he played, against Winnipeg here. And I mean, finally, we see a vintage Zach Collaros game, although normally he would have a couple more touchdown passes, but 27 of 33, 295 yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions. Brady Oliveira made it over 100 yards. Strevler did his thing. Overall, just a pretty solid performance by Winnipeg to get the victory here. Another 100-yard game out of that passing attack for Ontario Wilson, who's quickly becoming a star in the CFL. Adam Bighill and various others here had sacks. And then Sergio Castillo, 6 of 6, 1 extra point. You definitely cannot complain about that performance by him. So I think, in this game, like you said, Winnipeg did all the right things in terms of having a run game, keeping BC off the field. Basically the age-old adages to stopping a high-powered offense like BC. Is this kind of the formula, for lack of a better term? I mean, for other teams to come out and beat BC going forward?
I think it's going to be the formula for teams that are able to have ball control. This concerns me a little bit more with a team like Edmonton. I don't think Edmonton's going to be a team that's going to come out of nowhere and suddenly learn how to ball control just because they can't run the ball for the most part. But teams like Winnipeg, it's perfect for them because Brady Oliveira is just so damn talented. That it worked out in their favor. The one thing I will say that's still concerning about this Winnipeg team is not finishing drives. You set it down there at the bottom with the field goal, 6 for 6. Like, cool, that's great. It's not going to work every week. I don't care if your defense plays like this all the time. Like, it's still not going to work every week. Eventually, it's going to be one big play, and you lose by 4 points. So they have to figure out a way to clean up their red zone a little bit better as far as it's concerned. Lucky Whitehead was a great signing for them, though. The stat line doesn't show anything spectacular, but he's never been the guy that needs to be spectacular. He's a guy who can be spectacular, but he's also a guy who's like, we'll rack up the yardage and be like, the receptions and be like, the yardage will come. Don't worry about it. I mean, he went 6 for 56 and a touchdown in this game. So it's just the way that he is. And look, his yak was 44. So that's what Lucky Whitehead does. It's not always the flashiness, but there's always 1 or 2 plays that really put him over the edge. Ontario Wilson is becoming easily my favorite target for this Winnipeg team, and I'm sure Zach Collaros is very happy to have him. It's just the BC has a lot of issues on their own, but Winnipeg still needs to clean some things up. They're not going to be able to rely on this defense to constantly bail them out and put them in good field position. It literally is going to have to come down to this offense, which is still very weird to say about a Winnipeg team, but this offense is still lacking somewhere. And maybe this is the boost that they needed to try to turn it around and figure it out. Who knows?
To your credit, Winnipeg has 24 total plays in the red zone or red zone opportunities. They've only converted 11 of those into touchdowns. So most red zone opportunities in the league, second to least red zone touchdowns in the league. So definitely a huge concern there going forward if they cannot get that cleaned up right away. That defense is good, but I don't know that they're good enough to overcome that on a weekly basis by any stretch.
I mean, that's what, 42%, 41%.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's not going to do it. You're never going to win game, and that's probably why they've only won 3 games this year, right? They're 3-5, right? So I mean, you're not going to win games doing that. And if you're 3-5, there's a reason you're 3-5. And the first place they can look is right there at that red zone number.
Yep, 100%. I mean, like you said, they're lucky that Sergio Castillo hit all those kicks because this game could have potentially been a lot different if he had missed a few of those and given BC a short field to score from.
Well, I still think BC would have not scored because they looked terrible on offense. Winnipeg did such a great job getting them out, but the game wouldn't have been 25-0. It would have been probably like an ugly 12-0. Like it probably would have been like, oh, this is disgusting. Like, let's turn this game off because it wasn't a pretty 25 points.
No,
it wasn't pretty at all. Like,
yeah, I mean, six field goals, 1 touchdown, and extra point kicks. So I mean, that's essentially what it was right there. I mean, that's not a very fun game to watch unless you're a fan of defensive battles, which this very much was one of those. So moving on to the next game of the weekend, which Montreal came to play once again. We mentioned the fact that they have kind of transitioned over to Davis Alexander at quarterback, or at least until Cody Fajardo can return, which it sounds like he is already off the 6-game injured list, so that return may be sooner rather than later. Davis Alexander, through, I believe, 4 quarters, had 3 touchdowns and a little over 400 yards passing, but kind of ended up faltering there a little bit at the end and throwing an interception late in the game. But what do you make of Montreal kind of dismantling Hamilton here? Was this exactly what you expected?
Everybody's dismantling Hamilton right now. I mean, it's I don't even know where to start with Hamilton. Montreal is just a better team. I mean, you could plug and play pretty much any quarterback in here. And don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Caleb Evans is out for the year now too. I saw that might have been out. He's out for the year.
I would have to double check on the length of it, but I know that they went ahead and signed Dominique Davis, brought him in as the 3, so I would imagine that he's going to be out for an extended period, if not the entire year.
Yeah, I believe I read to the entire year today. So get well, Caleb, for sure. But yeah, man, I don't know. I think you could plug and play almost any quarterback in this system. That's the thing with Montreal is they're just so good. Like Walter Fletcher, 8 for 56, but he averaged 7 yards a carry, so you knew that the threat was always there, right? Like if they ran that ball 15 times, and Walter Fletcher probably goes for 140 yards. Like it was just a plug and play at the quarterback position. Just don't turn the ball over. And Davis Alexander did the most that he could with what he had for an opportunity, right? Hamilton, man, I don't know what happened with this team. I don't like the CFL. I will say does a very good job of having pretty good parity for the most part, right? Like every year we have a week or two where the teams that win are teams that we're not expecting to win, and et cetera, et cetera. But this Hamilton team, man, between this defense not being able to stop people, Tim White, man, he is having a rough year. He is having a really bad year. I don't know if the CFL keeps track of drops, but this dude must be damn near number 1 by at least 3 times the next person, because I feel like every other time that he's being targeted, he's dropping the ball. And it's very uncharacteristic of him because Tim White is usually one of the more shorthanded guys in the league, especially, for Bo Levi. So, yeah, man, I don't know what to make of this Hamilton team. I can't find one part where I can pinpoint and be like, that this is the reason they're losing games. It's literally a collective as a whole for this team. Something's not clicking there, and they better figure it out fast before the league leaves them behind.
They do not chart drops as far as the CFL stats per se, but he had 66 targets, only 33 receptions for 419 yards and 4 touchdowns. So definitely, obviously, a disconnect there. And I mean, this is a guy who's basically been the number 1 option or near the number 1 option for the Tiger Cats for multiple years now, and just generally a pretty reliable receiver. So it is kind of odd to see that him having these struggles so far this year.
I can count out of those 33 passes that didn't reach him for completions, I can count at least 7 drops that I have seen him that I remember throughout the course of the year through the first 8 games. So that's 1 drop a game that I can think of when he's had multiple drops in a couple games. This game here, he was 3 for 7, and I'm pretty sure he dropped 2 in this game. So I mean, you take a look at the rest of these guys here outside of that 1 for 5 at the bottom. I mean, 7 of 8, 9 of 11, 6 of 6, 4 of 6, 2 and 2. Like it's glaringly different with him at 3 for 7. So something's not right there with him this year. I hope he can turn around and figure it out, just so we can keep some parity in this game, in this league, and have a level of competition, because nobody likes to see a basic bye week, but it feels like it's a whole collective unit for this Hamilton team. It's just it's not pretty right now.
I will say their defense did a little bit better this week than the past couple weeks. I mean, 3 sacks, interception, forced fumble recovery. So, I mean, they did their part in this game. Probably would have been a lot uglier had they not been able to kind of stall some of those Montreal drives. But, man, I mean, you're right. Hamilton has got to figure something out. And I personally do not think it comes from the quarterback position either. So, I mean, you gotta do something here. Bo Levi Mitchell's playing well enough that you should be able to find a couple wins here and there this season. And it shouldn't be this bad currently. You got to figure out what the formula is there and kind of stick with it. But ultimately, we talked about it before. Montreal is just playing great complementary football. I mean, you see here Jose Carlos Maltos, 100% on his kicks in terms of field goal attempts this week. The defense stepped up, a couple tackles for a loss, a sack, a couple interceptions. It just overall was a great performance. They didn't let any huge plays by them or anything like that. And basically more of the same from Montreal this year, where they've basically just continued to make the plays when it matters the most. There's a reason why they only have one loss so far this season.
I think one of the big things about Hamilton too that I want to point out, discipline. I feel like that they constantly are shooting themselves in the foot, whether they're extending drives or killing their own drives or whatever it may be. It just feels like this team has been constantly shooting themselves in the foot with penalties, and I don't feel like it's been getting better. So that would be the one thing that I think is kind of been a selling point or a telling point for Hamilton this far in the season and why they only have 2 wins on the year.
Yeah, like you said, 7 penalties for 115 yards in this game. You look at the other side, Montreal had 4 penalties, but had less than half the penalty yardage that Hamilton had. So, it's not like they're just making penalty or having penalties here. They're having big, costly penalties when they happen. So, that directly affected their second down percentage, which gave Montreal more opportunities with the ball. And then they turned around and threw a couple interceptions and, gave away on downs at least once too. So Montreal was basically given every opportunity to win this game. And like I said, they made the plays when it mattered the most. And that's kind of been the hallmark of what Montreal does this season. They just simply show up and play good quality football on all 3 phases of the game. So shout out to Montreal. I think they're doing a great job here and under another first-time head coach, which maybe should be getting a little bit more mention as potential coach of the year this season. We'll have to kind of discuss that as the year goes on.
Yeah. Coach of the year is still fairly early, but you would definitely have to consider Montreal and, Saskatchewan as being the 2 front runners for sure.
Speaking of Saskatchewan, seems like a perfectly good time to get into their game, which was, of course, the 3rd game this weekend. And this, of course, was the 2nd week in a row that we got to see Tre Ford take the majority of the snaps for Edmonton. As mentioned before, he and Javon Leake ran all over the field, as did Justin Rankin. Ultimately, look at those rushing stats there. Over 200 yards rushing on the day, over 250 on the day, which was impressive. Javon Leake actually set a record for the fastest open field time in the NFL or CFL. I don't believe they track these stats in the UFL yet or any of the indoor leagues, but ultimately just a great performance by Tre Ford, an amazing performance by Javon Leake, and I have a really hard time thinking Leake's going to come out of that lineup anytime soon.
Yeah, no, this is where I felt like this was more telling to Saskatchewan, more than it was necessarily telling to a Edmonton, win of sorts. You know what I mean? Like, this was a situation where Saskatchewan totally gave up their rushing defense for whatever reason. It came out of nowhere. Javon Leake just skyrocketed and went through the roof in this situation. And you take a look at Edmonton's pass game, like a lot of these passes, Tevin Jones came off of play action plays because of Javon Leake and how he ran. So kudos to Tre Ford. He played really well. He only had the one mistake. He did not 18 to 22, so it wasn't like it was a terribly inaccurate game. Kudos to Edmonton for what they did do good, and they capitalized on a Saskatchewan team that was definitely struggling. But this was more telling to me on the defensive side of the ball that Saskatchewan has some leaks somewhere. I know that they're pretty banged up. You caught that. I'm glad you caught that. I'm glad you caught that. Saskatchewan's banged up a little bit though. But overall, like, I just feel like this is more telling to Saskatchewan than it is Edmonton, and hopefully Saskatchewan can kind of find that 4th quarter magic that's been their keys to success this year down the road. And we'll see with Edmonton. We'll see what happens with Edmonton. We'll see if the league catches up to Tre Ford or not.
Agreed. I think you called it backup quarterback syndrome, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Where a backup quarterback comes in and immediately finds that spark, but then it's only a matter of time before the league kind of catches up and starts game planning for his game and how the offense is run with him in there versus McLeod Bethel Thompson, who is not nearly as mobile as Tre Ford. I mean, most quarterbacks in the CFL or NFL really aren't. 4.4, 4.3 speed. That's pretty rare thing for quarterbacks these days, for sure.
Well, I mean, before you finish that, think about that real quick though with the backup quarterback syndrome. Taylor Powell, Dustin Crum, Tre Ford last year. You get a few games, but once there's more film out there for you, they start seeing your tendencies, and the leagues are smart. These are smart leagues. The CFL is not a dumb league by any means. It hasn't lasted as long as it has. If it was some kind of not intelligent type of style of league, right? Players included. So it catches up to you at some point in time. So Shea Patterson, same kind of thing. Like we started seeing that as well. So we'll see what happens. But kudos to Edmonton in this game for capitalizing where they needed to, and Javon Leake having a career day, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, hopefully this pans out for him, going forward, and he gets more opportunities to start or play more. I mean, anytime you rack up, over 180, 190 yards on the day, you definitely need to be given more opportunities. And actually, I think he had some kick return yards in there too that I'm not counting. Yep, 19. So he was over 200 yards total on the day. Unbelievably important performance for Edmonton in this game. And I mean, if he doesn't score those 3 touchdowns, they're not winning this game. Maybe they do in other ways, but ultimately impressive performance by him. Shout out to my buddy Brian, who loves to call me girl every chance he gets. He was just tuned into the Jawad Tim interview as well. So I appreciate the support, Brian. Love to see you in here. It definitely means the world to me every time you tune in, because I know you're not really a football guy. You're literally just here to support us because, you're an actual friend, and I really appreciate that. But I got a question for you, Mr. Washington, before we move on. Did Toronto make a mistake leaving Leake as a free agent? I mean, I know they brought in Janorian Grant, who is a great kick returner, but obviously Leake does some things on offense that Janorian does not.
This is always hard, because it's always look what he's doing now type of moment, right? It's always where did he fit in with Toronto? Could Toronto afford him? Was he part of Toronto's game plan moving forward? I don't know, man. It's hard to say. I mean, you would think so because Leake was very successful in Toronto. It's not like he didn't have, some success over there. It's just, it's hard to tell. What has he done prior to this game? It's all a matter of perspective. Like, what has Leake done overall in comparison to what maybe Janorian Grant does for Toronto, right? Like, so, I don't know. I know that Toronto just got ravaged when free agency. So did Winnipeg, with a bunch of players that were role players and key to their success. And maybe Javon Leake was one of those guys because he was very successful in that Toronto offense. But maybe it was a shift in philosophies, and they just felt like that they could find somebody they could come in and do what he already did for the team.
Well, to your credit, prior to this past weekend, he had 15 carries with Toronto over 25 games for 52 yards. So could definitely understand why they're kind of letting him go if he's not that big of a factor, even as a backup running back there. Meanwhile, in 8 games this season, he's already got 34 carries for 289 yards and 3 touchdowns. And granted, we just talked about 169 yards on the ground in this past game. So that means he had, 120 rushing yards over 7 games. So, I mean, obviously he wasn't really doing a whole lot for Edmonton before this either. Now, granted, I think that was more Edmonton than it was him. But this guy's always been valued as a kick returner due to his breakaway speed in the open field. And, that's exactly what made him so dangerous this past weekend. So shout out to Javon Leake, who obviously is one of the fastest men in football, as we saw. And hopefully he can find more success going forward, because it was a lot of fun to watch him kind of
Yes.
dominate this
Oh,
game.
yeah. Absolutely. I just think that sometimes you have those rose-colored glasses on, right? Like we get really like, ooh, 12 for look how big that was. Look at a great number that was, and it's like, yeah, but the dude is like, caught 65 passes over 5 seasons in college, so it's not always it's not always pretty.
Absolutely. And a couple players on Saskatchewan I wanted to shout out. I mean, we mentioned a moment ago, Shea Patterson playing better than expected for Saskatchewan. I mean, in this game, 22 of 38, 306 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Obviously he got hit a lot in this game, so
He did.
He even took a couple head hits, which some of them not so legal as well.
Yes.
Frankie Hickson had to step in for the running game due to some injuries, which is obviously concerning if AJ Ouellette can't go next week or the week after. Obviously they play on Thursday this week, so I don't expect to see him back, although I have not checked the injury report quite yet for Saskatchewan. One other guy that I wanted to shout out for this Saskatchewan offense is Aju, and hopefully I'm saying his name. Maybe it's Ajo. I can't really correctly remember. It shows here that he had 8 targets and only 3 receptions, but that's not really telling the full story, because I think there were a couple different passes that he was thrown that were either near to impossible to catch, or literally it was one of those throws where the quarterback puts it in a position where either he's going to catch it or nobody's going to catch it. And there was one play where he nearly made a very, very acrobatic catch in the back of an end zone, and it was just millimeters away from it being called a touchdown. So shout out to him. I think he's a very promising player who's a rookie, and I'm very excited to see what he has in store for us for the rest of the year, and then ultimately his future in the CFL.
Yeah, I saw him play a lot in college, and I'm glad he landed on his feet up there in the CFL. I think it's a perfect game for him. I believe I read online he was credited with 0 drops in this game, and of those 5 incompletions, I think it was like 3 of them were deemed uncatchable. So they still count as targets because they were in his vicinity, but it was not they just weren't catchable. I think it was very close to the same to Sean Bain with his 5 incompletions. I think it was like 2 of them were not catchable, and he had 1 drop, I believe, and then Emilus was all 3 of his were deemed uncatchable. So it's Shea Patterson. That's the Shea Patterson effect right there. Like, I like I said, I think he's played well enough to be in the conversation. It's just those are the mistakes that you can't make as a quarterback, and he had those same issues at Michigan. And he had those same issues with the Michigan Panthers, I believe he was with. So, and the reason why he didn't have the starting job there as well.
New Jersey Generals he was with, but
The
yeah,
Jersey.
you're
That's right. That's right. The Jersey Generals.
I think that's why we ultimately saw DeAndre Johnson so much in that first year there. So moving on to another game that was a little bit surprising and a little bit hurtful for my wallet, although all of these CFL games were hurtful for my wallet, but we won't get into that. Toronto had control of this game for much of it. In fact, I think they went into halftime up 22-6, and it looked like they were coasting to a victory the rest of the way. And then we came out after half, and all of a sudden, Calgary seemed to flip the script and turn it on, and scored 21 unanswered points in the fourth quarter to ultimately pull home a victory.
It wasn't coming out of the half. It was coming out of the third quarter.
True, coming out of the third quarter. You're right. They did look a little bit better out of half, I will say that, but definitely it wasn't until the fourth quarter to where it really started adding up and being meaningful for them on the scoreboard. But I mean, you're the resident Stampeders fan, so I'll let you go ahead and kind of kick us off on this one.
Well, I'll just tell you right now. I mean, you can look at it and see what Toronto's problem was. You can see it just on the stat sheet, because this one particular stat sheet showcases what it was for this team this past weekend, and it's right there in the rushing column. And why is Cameron Dukes your number one leading rusher? That is a huge problem. Because you take a look at a guy as talented as Kadeem Carey, which was supposed to be a homecoming game, 8 carries for 31 yards. So Calgary was like, hey, it might be a homecoming game. It might be your quote-unquote revenge game, but guess what we're going to do? LOL. And what happened was at the end of the game, they had made Toronto so one-dimensional that they were able to capitalize on it. And the field position game was in their favor the entire fourth quarter. I think 2 of their 3 touchdowns at the end of the game came on short fields or from the 55-yard line. Like it was very, very, they were not long drives because they didn't need to be. And Jake Mayer, to his credit, didn't play the best game in the first half. First 3 quarters, really, you could even say, didn't play the best game in the world. But that fourth quarter is the reason why Calgary puts their trust in him. I would have picked Calgary if we had a show last week, and you and I would have disagreed, and I'd be bragging on the show about it. But this is a Calgary team that we've been seeing this year, right? It's the Stamps. They're gritty. They want to hang around in games, and if it falls their way, great. If it doesn't fall their way, we live to fight another day. I mean, that's why they're 4-4, right? So it's just the makeup of this Calgary team this year, and I think that's what they're going to need to lean into if they're going to want to make a playoff push.
Absolutely. And honestly, if I had looked a bit closer at the statistics over the whole season, I probably would have picked Calgary in this one. They are undefeated at home, but have not won a game on the road. So obviously that's a little bit of a tell there that I should have known. But I was bet with my heart, not my my head. And I ultimately thought Toronto was going to take home the victory in this one. And that's what happens when you bet with your heart, not your head. You lose a whole bunch of money.
I mean, to be fair, though, I mean, it was perfectly set up for Toronto to win this game. I mean, it's not like Toronto didn't have the ability to come out and do something in this game. It's just they failed in the fourth quarter where Calgary succeeded.
Agreed. And it's ultimately, that it's shot them in the foot a couple times this year. So we'll see if Toronto can kind of turn things around. And I mean, we should be nearing the point where we see Chad Kelly return.
I think it's I think in 2 weeks. If it's not 2 weeks, it's in the next 2 games. Because I think they have a bye week 9, which is this week.
No, they play
or a bye week in week 10, and he'll be back the following week after that, I believe.
We're heading into week 10. They play Calgary at home.
Okay.
And then in week 11, you're correct. They are.
That's it. Okay, that's what it is.
Yep,
yeah,
so you're right.
I knew that he's coming back out of a bye week because after that game in the bye week, it basically will give him. I think they said he can start having contact with the team 2 days prior to the week 11 slate. And then he can come back and to practice on that following Monday. So if I read it correctly, so he should be able to be in communication and I mean, let's be honest, chances are he's probably been in communications anyways. It's just been secret, but he should be able to start having communications with the team and getting him familiarized with anything that may be happening. So when he comes into practice, he can just plug and play. So he should be back soon. I think within their second game over the course of the next 3 weeks, he'll be back. So
definitely, and I tend to agree. He's probably talking to somebody because he's pretty vocal on Twitter recently. He's obviously getting pretty bored there in his suspension time. So I hope he comes back, and I hope he ultimately puts this behind him and stays out of trouble for the remainder of his career, because he's one of those guys where he has the potential to be probably the best quarterback in the CFL. I mean, we saw it last year. I almost said yesterday. We saw it last year with him, and I think that he has that potential, but he's always been that type of guy that's kind of always been right there adjacent to the line where if he crosses it, he's going to be suspended, and if he doesn't, he's going to be the greatest quarterback in on his team, and if not in the league. So I hope he ultimately finds out and realizes that he's kind of shooting himself in the foot in a lot of these situations. I mean, there's no real way you can argue what they found. I don't know enough about the situation, but ultimately the league felt enough that they suspended him for half a year. You don't do that if you don't have sufficient evidence, I don't think. So surprised to see that Toronto as a franchise didn't take more of a penalty there, but that kind of plays into the fact that they may not have known quite as much about this as we may have thought at the time. But real quick, sorry, go ahead.
I also wonder if how much of it was Toronto being cooperative with the investigation and not trying to hinder it or slide it or minimize it or anything along those lines too. So I'm not sure, but a 9-game suspension is pretty harsh, and I don't think he appealed it though. Did he? Or did he appeal it and get denied? Or
let me look it up real quick. But on that note, we are going to take a quick commercial break, and while I get you that information, not that one.
This is Current. It's the card my parents used to pay me for mowing the lawn, running errands, and doing well in school. This is the card I used when we got the idea to make our own clothes. And we spread the word, drove downtown, and sold everything we made. This is the card I used to do the things that really matter. This is Current. Visit current.com and download the app for free today.
I'm just being myself, cool as can be. When I'm being myself, you wish you were me. It's so easy. Get out your own way. It's just so easy.
All right, as if that wasn't enough sponsor plugs, here's another sponsor for us, the Bet US. So definitely check them out and use our code, which is in the description below. That will help you get a huge bonus when you put in any money, and so huge that I wish I could do it myself, but unfortunately we are removed, or I am removed from using my own code. Funny how that works. So definitely wanted to go ahead and get into our predictions on the next week's games, or this week's games, considering Saskatchewan and Ottawa play tomorrow. So let's go ahead and get right into it. What do you think happens in tomorrow's game with Saskatchewan visiting Ottawa?
See, this is a key game because Ottawa is 5-2. We talked about them being undefeated at home, but Saskatchewan just came off that kind of a letdown of a game against Edmonton, right? Like, it's just they need to find a way to bounce back and make sure that they set the tone for the rest of the year, right? Like, it's like we know that we're ahead of where we want to be, but we are a good football team, and we can do this. As for Ottawa, man, I every time I feel like I pick against this team, it's just like they find a way to win. I'm going to take Saskatchewan with the points, but I think Ottawa wins this game. And I'm going to say over. I'm going to say Ottawa wins this game 27-25. You're on mute, Sam.
Sorry about that. Trying to type, talk, all this at the same time. It's hard being the producer sometimes.
It is. Yeah.
So Michael picks the over and Saskatchewan with the points, but says Ottawa is going to win 27-25.
I'm rooting for Saskatchewan, though.
Oh, that's fair. I mean, to be completely honest, I slightly want Corey Mace to continue winning, only because I like seeing a coach come in and find immediate success like that. But I am going to also pick Ottawa in this game, and I think they cover the spread in this one. If you've paid close attention to the Twitter account, obviously you probably know that I cover the Ottawa Redblacks, and I've been tweeting a lot about their injury situation. Going into this game, they were extremely injured, or sorry, not into this game, into last week's bye week. They were extremely injured. They had 6 or 7 different players that were limited in practice the past couple weeks. And coming into this game, even though we had a short week, we got many players back, including Justin Howell, Elijah McGee. Both are very, very valuable defensive backs. And it looks like Money Hunter and Brandon Dandridge are trending towards returning next week. Wish we would have had him against Saskatchewan, but I'm still fairly confident in Ottawa in this one. So, like I said, Ottawa is going to cover, in my personal opinion. 48.5. I don't know if we get there this week.
I will say that Ottawa's point forward and points against are the 2 lowest in the league. So they are very much a defensive-minded, ball control-esque type of team. So it is very possible that the under hits on this. I just have a feeling that this might end up being a back-and-forth matchup. That's why I went over, personally.
That's completely fair. I'm going to go Ottawa covers the spread, but I think we don't hit the over in this particular one. I think Ottawa is going to win at 24-18. So basically, in my mind, pick the under and pick Ottawa. Although I would say, once again, I have not had the best luck with betting, so you probably want to take Michael's advice on this one. I'm definitely betting with my heart. Huge Ottawa fan, so hoping they find victory this week. There's a reason why I cover him, and it's not for not because I don't like the team. But moving on to the next game, this one might be a little bit more of a pick with your heart situation for Michael because he is a Stampeders fan. But this is also a very close spread. It's basically a pick 'em. So, I mean, who do you got in this one?
It's a rematch of last week. I mean, the only difference is Calgary's on the road, which has not been good for them. So, Toronto at home. And take the, oh man, I don't know. 49.5 is pretty big. Give me the under. I think the score is gonna be very similar to what we saw last week. I'm going to be rooting for Calgary, obviously, because I am the Stamps fan. But I'm going to say Toronto, very similar to last week. So Toronto 26 and Calgary 21. Just on the under.
Hey, that's still the under. I mean, 26-21. He picks Toronto at home. At home. That is not at home.
Well, Toronto's at home.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know what I'm saying. It's fairly late at this point. So apparently what I typed is correct. What I'm saying is incorrect. So we'll just go ahead and ignore that. I'm also picking Toronto on this one. I think they are going to take home this victory. We just spoke about how Calgary has not won a game on the road yet. I don't expect them to do it in this game, especially with how Toronto had control of the game up until the third quarter this past weekend when they were on the road in Calgary. So I've got a lot of faith in Toronto to be able to win this game and then ultimately walk into, Chad Kelly coming back with a pretty solid record. I think they would be 6-3 at that point coming out of the bye. So that could be a valuable victory to them and keep them in the playoff running just in time for their savior to come back. And I think I'm going to say in this game 22-16 Toronto. So firmly in the under for me. And obviously they're going to cover this 2-point spread. So going to be an interesting game though, because there's a reason to pick them. It could definitely go both ways, although I don't have much faith in Calgary winning on the road currently. And apparently I'm not the only one. So moving on to the next game, we have Hamilton at Montreal. Excuse me, with a 7.5-point spread. That's a huge spread, but Montreal's been the best team in the league, Hamilton on the other side of that. So I'm curious, do you think Hamilton can cover the spread?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to rematch from last week again. This time Montreal's at home. So it I don't know what they want me to say on this one. I think it's going to be a very similar game again. I think Montreal is going to end up coming in. I think they cover the spread pretty easily, to be honest with you. I'm not taking the over, though, just because I don't think Hamilton does their part. So I'm going to say 34 to 16. No, 34 to 14. Montreal.
Gotcha. Okay. So just under the under, but at the same time, they didn't hit it last week. They had 49 points. So probably right about correct there. I honestly have it being a very similar game as well. I mean, my current score is probably going to be a little bit lower for overall. I think, man, Montreal, I have them probably getting 30. I think Hamilton's going to be right around that 15, 16 mark again, but I'm going to go ahead and give him 17 in this one and 40 points overall. Montreal, I mean, man, if they can kind of make it through this week and make it through a couple more and Cody Fajardo comes back, they could turn around and be one of the toughest teams to beat right into the playoff run, which could be huge for them if they want to go ahead and defend that Grey Cup championship they had last year. Keep saying last week and not last year. Yeah, definitely think Montreal covers the spread, 13-point deficit here, and ultimately we see Montreal continue to defend their crown as the best team in the CFL currently, although a couple teams are going to be coming up on them here pretty soon if injuries agree. But moving on to the last game of the weekend, which is actually a lot closer than I would have expected, but that's probably because of the injury to Vernon Adams. BC +2 versus Edmonton at home, who is the favorite. Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I don't know, man. I don't know. This BC team is so infuriating. On paper, even when Vernon Adams was playing, you would assume that this team would be blowing everybody out and easily the best team in the league. And what are they, 5-3? So it's not like that this team has been necessarily lighting the world on fire. So is Vernon out? Do we know? Is he out for any extended period of time? Is it this Jake Delgado?
I think it's Jake Delgado this week, but I need to check on the extent of his injury.
Well, I'm going to take Edmonton then at -2, unless Jake Delgado has the backup quarterback syndrome. I think Tre Ford's kind of lit a fire a little bit under this Edmonton team. I don't know how long it will last, but I think they're going to ride it while they can. I don't know if I could take the over in this one, though. I don't think BC gets there. So I'm going to say I'll take Edmonton -2 and to score 27 and BC to score 13.
Okay. So 27-13 Edmonton. I also picked Edmonton this week, and I actually firmly think we are going to see the over. Edmonton's been scoring a lot of points all year, even before Tre Ford came into the lineup. Then you see them, have a 40-point outburst last week against a pretty solid Saskatchewan team on defense. I don't know that BC's defense is nearly as good, and we've talked about how BC's offense is very predicated on the long game. So if they can get anything going on offense, this could turn into a high-scoring affair very quickly. I've got Edmonton winning. I think they're going to go ahead and top 40 again. I'm going to say 40 to – I'm going to go ahead and do it. 40-27 BC. So 67 points scored. Now, will that actually happen? I don't know, but I see this being a very high-scoring, exciting game. If you want to see what the CFL is all about, this actually might be a really good game to watch for you. So definitely tune in this weekend because there's going to be a lot of great games. I think that Ottawa game versus Saskatchewan is going to be good. I think this one, Edmonton and BC, is going to be good. Calgary, Montreal, both of those teams are doing some damage, so I think both of those other games are going to be great. Hamilton's the kind of wild card here that could kind of ruin a great week of football, but we'll see exactly how things pan out for everybody involved. Any final thoughts before we get out of here? I know it's kind of getting late on your side of the world over there.
No, I mean, it's just a matter of the only thing that I hate so much about the scheduling in this league is we get a lot of rematches back to back. It's like home and home games, and I get it because there's only 9 teams, but do you really need to go 18 weeks? That's always up for debate. I mean, I'm glad they do because we get more football, but you see these teams play each other a lot in back-to-back, situations. I believe last year it was like Edmonton and BC played each other 4 out of 5 weeks. Like it was miserable as far as like that's concerned. So I'd like to see a little more variety when it comes to, randomization of the schedule, so we're not getting these back-to-backs. But it is what it is. You just deal with it and move on. But yeah, that's about it though. That's the only thing that I wish the league would change up a little bit more of.
Yeah, I mean, scheduling wise, I could definitely agree on that. I do think it creates a unique situation where you get some interesting games where, teams might win at home and then turn around and lose on the road. But
Yeah,
it's definitely weird from an American fan's perspective because we just don't get that in the NFL or any of these other leagues that we've got to follow here. But with that in mind, you have to get creative when you only have 9 teams. There's only so many combinations there. So definitely see how that kind of makes an ease of scheduling. I mean, if you just have teams play each other, 2 weeks in a row, that's kind of a default that you can go with, and then you kind of build the schedule around that. I will say that I still, want to harp on the fact that I really love when they do the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday games.
yeah.
Just it makes it so much easier for somebody like me who can't sit down and watch a full game immediately. I'm watching it the next morning or whatever it may be. So it gives me more time to catch up before I have another game to try and catch up on. And, typically by Tuesday, I've watched all the games. So that is very helpful, especially when we do the show on Wednesday. So
Yes.
Definitely appreciate that, CFL. If we could keep that going all year long. I know it's tough with the NFL coming and Thursday night football, obviously, for the NFL, but maybe you do a little bit of Monday night. Who knows? But definitely appreciate the CFL for providing their product basically for free on CFL Plus most of the season. I know there's some games that are blacked out on there and you have to catch them on CBS Sports Network, but great opportunity for you to catch some great football and not have to pay out of pocket to do so. I think that was one of the best moves the league has ever done for their exposure and for their fans, and I think we should all take advantage of it while we have it, because it may not last long. It all just depends on how much one of these networks wants to shell out to get all these games, because personally, the CFL should definitely be on broadcast television in the U.S. as well as the Canada and surrounding countries. Because
I will say I'm surprised with the lack of ESPN deal, because the numbers were really, really good and increasing last year. At least I believe it was last year in their final year of the contract. It was either last year or the year before, but the viewership numbers were increasing. So I was a little surprised when they came off the ESPN network. And the games weren't shown on ESPN Plus. But kudos to the league for putting out CFL Plus for us and here in the States, and getting the deal done with CBS, even though it's not all of them. I would expect to see this league being televised down here on a regular basis before long.
2022, actually, which would make sense because obviously Disney and ESPN were involved with the UFL, which is sort of a competitor, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I think I knew it was close. It was either 2022 or 2023, but their last deal with ESPN was their numbers were really good. They were steadily improving every time the games were on ESPN2, etc. So for sure.
It's kind of odd. I mean, when you're letting players go between both leagues, is it really competition? I don't know. Maybe I'll look at it a little bit different, but
I mean, it all overlapped only by 2 weeks. UFL championship game and the start of the CFL year, basically, or no?
I'd have to look back at the exact dates. I actually think that you're correct on that one, but don't quote me on that. My memory's terrible. So definitely look that information up if you need an answer to that question right away. But we appreciate everybody who tuned in tonight. We had pretty solid viewership numbers this whole time. Definitely stick with us for the rest of the CFL season. Every Wednesday night at 10:30 p.m. Sometimes we start a little bit late. Me and Michael like to talk off camera a little bit. So don't hold that against us. We generally enjoy each other's company and conversation. Obviously, that's why we do these shows together, as well as the rest of the people on the network. We're all kind of buddies outside of the camera as well. So it is kind of cool to catch up with these guys and stuff like that when we have the opportunity. But again, appreciate everybody who tuned in. If you haven't done so already, make sure you jump over to the YouTube channel, subscribe, comment, share it with your friends, help us get some new viewers. We appreciate all of that. And tune in next week. We'll have another great episode for you.